Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen, whatever time you're tuning in the program here called What's Going On at allpointstv.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program that comes on Mondays at 2 o'clock, and we were around for about an hour and hope you'll stay tuned for the next hour. We're going to try to bring something to you that you will get a lot out of, and I think you will get some out of this right here. I love talking about the great framers we had in this country, and I'm going to try to read something to you. Hope you don't get too tired out in terms of what happened at the last days of the convention that we had to bring about the Constitution of the United States. And this is about what the framers did at the very ending of that time in September. As you know, the Constitutional Convention was held, what turned into a Constitutional Convention was held from May the 25th, 1787, until September the 17th of that year, 1787. And during that time period, they constructed, in my view, the greatest constitutional document that's ever been created. And every other document that came thereafter was a copy of it because they realized what they had in terms of the framers had, in fact, created at that time. There's been no document that's been created since that time period that did not take into consideration what was said here by the framers of this country. And I would suggest that we start to have a little bit more respect for it in the United States, since around the world is the most copied constitutional document in the world. And I've been in some of those parts of the world where I've seen the document, rewritten. And also, by the way, when they had the so-called Civil War in this country, that's a document that the South was using. You go and read the Southern Constitution. I know you say the Confederacy and so on and so forth, but go and look at their Constitution. All it was the Constitution of the United States. At least the parts of it that were the original documents, of course, wouldn't have the amendments in it because we are not amended. Well, it would have not the amended parts of it because that would be something additional to what was the original document by the framers. What they were doing was going back to the framers that's in that room, and they were emulating that and standing up for it because they understood what this document was, and they were standing up to make it a reality, and they felt it was being violated. That's why they stood up. They thought that the framers were being disrespected. And this other noise people make about it was about this and about that and about slavery. It wasn't about slavery, and it wasn't about this and about something else. And you can make all these claims that you make, but the documents but the history cannot be changed because you will it to be different. The history is what was made at the time it was being made, and all these things later on by these cults have been created. CULTS, these cults that have been created. The Lincoln cult that's been created, for example, and to change what this war was about, saying is about slavery. You can't contend that when the war being fought between 1861 and 1865 had slave states on both sides of the war. You can't contend this war over slavery if you have slave states fighting, no matter how reluctantly they were fighting. They're fighting on against the 11 states that succeeded, and they're slave states fighting reluctantly. Some of them may have been that, but you got slave states fighting, however reluctantly, against slave states that have succeeded. You can't contend that war is over slavery then. And I mean, Maryland was a slave state. I say today, given that not that this was intention to defend Joe Biden, but Joe Biden's state was a slave state. The state that stayed in the Union, that was a slave state. One of the four that did so. Missouri was another. Missouri was a slave state that stayed in the Union. And I said Maryland, okay, Delaware, Missouri, and there was another state that stayed in the Union. I have to think of it here for a minute. 4 states altogether. There were 800,000 slaves altogether that were in the Union at the time this war was being fought over the 4-year period of time. So to contend that this war is over slavery cannot be contended by the fact that slave states are fighting against slave states. So what are they doing? shooting the guns, so the guns, they have some guns that turn around and they're aiming the guns and the bullet comes around and shoot back at them. That's not what's going on, and that's not what's happening here. This war is a war over Southern secession. The states, 11 of them, of the 15 slave states, and there were 15 of them, and not 11, of the 15 slave states, 11 of them succeeded, and 4 of the slave states did not succeed. So the war is not over slavery, so the war is over secession. Now, let me, what I want to read today, with that in mind, I wanted to read in this book. I want to show you how great these framers were. I want to read from this book called Eyewitness to America. 500 Years of America in the words of those who saw it happen. This is through the eyes of and this, what I'm reading today is through the eyes of those who were there. And this chapter in this book, Eyewitness to America, is titled, this particular chapter titled, Last Minute Dissenters at the Constitutional Convention. These are last minute dissenters at the convention. The 3 persons that did not sign, they were there at the end, and there were 42 of them at the end, 3 of them that did not sign. And that's why that's titled, The Last Minute Dissenters at the Constitutional Convention. This is written by James Madison, the father of the Constitution. And here's what it says. This is some very interesting information. Here's the reading of it. To put the objections of the dissenters in perspective, the Constitution prepared at the convention was certainly imperfect by modern standards. It failed to secure many crucial individual rights, later guaranteed in its first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. It also failed to resolve the differences between the states that would lead to the Civil War. But Delegate Benjamin Franklin was a pragmatist. He knew a perfect document could not be created in the first attempt, given the many different views of the delegates. His own suggestions for the government, such as a single federal legislative body rather than both a House and a Senate, had been ignored. Just when the convention was on the verge of falling apart, the revered figure, the elder statesman at the convention, almost 82 years old, rose from his seat to rally the delegates to a common cause, calling for them to ratify the Constitution despite their concerns and to move the country forward, put the country first. Franklin's speech was read by James Wilson, a younger Pennsylvanian delegate, considered an intellectual equal to Jefferson and Adams. Wilson played a key role in shaping the Constitution. He had worked to maintain a balance between federal power and states' rights, and to ensure that the national government was elected directly by the people rather than by the state assemblies. He later became a justice of the Supreme Court. On September the 15th, this is 12 days before the adjournment. I'm sorry, this is 2 days before the adjournment. Mr. Gerry, Massachusetts, stated the objections which determined him to withhold his name from the Constitution. 1, the duration and re-eligibility of the Senate. 2, the power of the House of Representatives to conceal their journals. The third objection that Gerry had, the power of Congress over the places of election. 4, the unlimited power of Congress over their own compensation. 5, that Massachusetts has not a fair share of representatives allotted to her based upon the population. 6, that 3/5 of the blacks are to be represented. as if they were free men. 7, that under the power over commerce, monopolies may be established. 8, the vice president being made head of the Senate. He could, however, he said, get over these if the rights of the citizens were not rendered insecure, first by the general power of the legislature to make what laws they may please to call necessary and proper. Secondly, to raise armies and money without limit. Thirdly, to establish a tribunal without jurors, which will be a star chamber as to civil cases. Under such views of the Constitution, the best that could be done, he conceded, was provide for a second general convention. This is Mr. Jerry's point. On September 17th, the last day of the convention, the engrossed Constitution being read, Dr. Franklin is saying here, rose with a speech in his hand, which he read, which he reduced to writing for his own convenience, and which Mr. Wilson read in the words following. Mr. President, I confess that there are several parts of the Constitution which I do not at present approve. This is Franklin speaking. But I'm not sure I should never approve them. For having lived long enough, Franklin, 82 years old, I have experienced many instances of being obliged by better information or fuller consideration to change opinions, even on important subjects, which I once thought right, but found to be otherwise. It is therefore that the older I grow, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgment and to pay more respect to the judgment of others. Most men, indeed, as well as most sects in religion, think themselves in possession of all truth, and that whenever others differ from them, it is so far in error. Still, a Protestant in a dedication tells the Pope that the only difference between our churches and their opinions of the Church of England is that each feels they're never in the wrong. But though many private persons think almost as highly of their own infallibility and that of their sect, few express it so naturally as a certain French lady who, in dispute with her sister, said, I don't know how it happens, sister, but I meet with nobody but myself that is always in the right. In these sentiments, sir, I agree to the Constitution. With all its faults, if they are such, because I think a general government necessary for us, and therefore in no form of government is no form of government, but what may be a blessing to the people if well administered, and believe further that this is likely to be well administered for a course of years and can only end in despotism as other forms have done before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need despotic government, being incapable of any other. I doubt, too, whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a constitution better. For when you assemble a number of men to have the advantage of their own joint wisdom, you inevitably assemble with those men all their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views. In other words, it's the best we can do. From such an assembly can a perfect production be expected. It therefore astonishes me, sir, to find this system approaching so near to perfection as it does. And I think it will astonish our enemies who are waiting with confidence to hear that our counsels are confounded, like those of the builders of Babel, and that our states are on the point of separation, on to meet hereafter after the purpose of cutting one another's throats. Thus I contend, sir, to the Constitution, because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that is not the best, the opinions I have had of his errors I sacrifice to the public good. Franklin is disagreeing with he's saying that he's aware of the shortcomings, but to have come up with the document that he came up with is a miracle in of itself because of the contingent differences of those who have different opinions at the convention. To have come up with what they have at this point was unbelievable and probably the best that could be expected under the circumstances. I have never whispered, he says, a syllable of them abroad. Within these walls they were born, and here they shall die. On the whole, sir, I cannot help expressing a wish that every member of this convention, who may still have objections to it, would, with me on this occasion, doubt a little of their own infallibility and make manifest our unanimity. Put his name to this instrument. He then moved that the Constitution be signed by the members and offered the following as convenient form. Done in convention, this is a quote of Franklin, done in convention by the unanimous consent of the states present, the 17th of September, and so forth. In witness thereof, we have hereunto subscribed our names. This ambiguous form had been drawn up by Mr. Governor Morris in order to gain the dissenting members and put into the hands of Dr. Franklin that it might have the better chance of success. Don't forget Franklin is the elder statesman. Mr. Randolph then rose and, with an allusion to the observations of Dr. Franklin, apologized for his dissent. He said, however, that he did not mean by his refusal to decide that he should oppose the Constitution without doors. He meant only to keep himself free to be governed by his duty as it should be prescribed by his future judgment. He refused to sign because he thought the object of the convention would be frustrated by the alternative, which is presented to the people. 9 states will fail to ratify the plan, and confusion must ensue. Mr. Governor Morris said that he too had objections, but considering the present plan as the best that was to be attained, he should take it with all its faults. The majority had determined in his favor, and by that determination he should abide. The moment this plan goes forth, all other considerations will be laid aside. And the great question will be, shall there be a national government or not? And this must take place, or a general anarchy will be the alternative. Mr. Williamson did not think a better plan was to be expected and had not scruples against putting his name to it. Mr. Hamilton expressed his anxiety that every member should sign. A few characters of consequence by opposing or even refusing to sign the Constitution might do infinite mischief by kindling the latent sparks that lurk under an enthusiasm in favor of the convention, which may soon subside. No man's ideas were more remote from the plan that his own were known to be. But is it possible to deliberate between anarchy and convulsion on one side, and chance of good to be expected from the plan on the other? In other words, the flaws are recognized to be the flaws in the document, hopefully to be corrected in the future through certain processes put in place. The amendment, for example, in Article 5. Mr. Blunt, now Blunt, don't forget, will be the person that will later on be a senator from Tennessee, but at this time he's a delegate from North Carolina. Mr. Blunt said he would, without committing himself, attest the fact that the plan was unanimous act of the states in convention. Dr. Franklin hoped that Randolph would yet lay aside his objections and, by concurring with his brethren, prevent the great mischief which the refusal of his name might produce. Mr. Randolph repeated that in refusing to sign the Constitution, he took a step which might be the most awful of his life, but it was dictated by his conscience, and it was not possible for him to hesitate, much less to change. He repeated that his persuasion that his holding out his plan with a final alternative to the people of accepting or rejecting it in total would not really produce the anarchy and civil convulsions which were apprehended from the refusal of individuals to sign it. Three of them, I said, were those persons at the end of the convention that refused to sign the document. Mr. Gerry described the painful feeling of this situation and the embarrassment under which he rose to offer any further observations on the subject which had been finally decided. While the plan was depending, he had treated it with all the freedoms he thought it deserved. He now felt himself bound, as he was disposed, to treat it with respect due to the act of the convention. He hoped he should not violate that respect in declaring on this occasion his fears that a civil war may result from the present crisis of the United States. General Pinckney said, "We are not likely to gain many converts by the ambiguity of the proposed form of signing." He thought it best to be candid and let the form speak for the substance. On the motion of Dr. Franklin, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, aye. 10. South Carolina divided, and others. Nays. The members then proceeded to sign the Constitution as finally amended. The Constitution being signed by all the members except Mr. Randolph, Mr. Mason, and Mr. Gerry, who declined giving it the sanction of their names, the convention dissolved itself by an adjournment. While the last members were signing, Dr. Franklin, looking towards the president's chair, the chair set in by the great George Washington, at the back of which a rising sun happened to be painted, Franklin observed to a few members near him that painters had found it difficult to distinguish in their art a rising from a setting sun. I have said he often in the course of the session and the vicissitudes of my hopes and fears as to his issue, looked at that behind the president without being able to tell whether it was a rising or a setting sun. But now at length, I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun. And that could not be determined at that time. That is to be determined by each generation. And that's the determination on those of us who are here now. That's for us to decide and continue forward with that decision. Okay, that's a wrap for today in terms of the program for the day. And I want to thank you for listening, because you listen to the greatest minds that this country has produced. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.